Welcome back. Disney is a massive part of the Florida economy. Floridians pay no state income taxes in large part due to the 100 million people who visit our state each year. So if you've ever had a mojito in Miami, a daiquiri in Destin, or a roller coaster ride in Orlando, thank you for subsidizing my taxes, my roads, my schooling, and the economic development that drove my beloved Florida. Disney is a massive part of this draw, which is why it was rough to see Florida fighting with our benefactor, the Walt Disney Corporation. It started when Disney Corp decided to lobby against a bill supported by a vast majority of Floridians and state legislators to get radical gender ideology out of our schools. It was good legislation, and I'm glad it's the law today. They called it the Don't Say Gay bill, which was a misnomer. We just decided, as a matter of state policy, that gender was determined by chromosomes, not the third grade teacher. Governor DeSantis retaliated against Disney for this move, and many, including myself, cheered him on. He appointed loyalists to oversee the geography Disney occupies. He waged a public war against Disney as a brand.
So I think so this is the issue at Disney, they had self-government in this state for almost 60 years. We put a stop to that. We ended their self-governing status.
Ultimately, sentiment turned against some of DeSantis' tactics. Amid his presidential run, a YouGov poll found that only 28% of Americans took DeSantis' side on his criticisms against Disney. But sentiment also turned against the DEI initiatives once championed by Disney. We've seen Google, Meta, and other corporate giants move away from DEI, and now even Disney seems to be doing the same, at least on its face. We see this based on a report from The Hollywood Reporter. It said, quote, pressure from the government to eliminate programs that exclude certain groups on the basis of race has prompted several companies to retreat from efforts to boost diversity in their ranks, close quote. This highlights the reality that DEI is not inclusive, but in fact very much the opposite. So is this Disney wanting to get out of politics and back into family fun and economic success, or is it just a head fake? Anthony Sabatini is a county commissioner in Lake County, Florida, right in the shadow of Disney. And the Honorable Chris Dorworth is a former Florida State Representative and former Speaker Designate of the Florida House. They join me now. Chris, you represented a central Florida district in the state legislature that benefited economically from Disney. Describe how Disney's relationship with the Florida legislature has changed over time and where it stands today.
Well, it was great for a long time. It was a pretty good working relationship. There's lots of folks around here who worked there. It sort of stayed out of politics, and to the extent they did, it was more of a be involved in what issues facing like land growth management. And then, oftentimes, as is the case, their longtime leader Bob Iger left and was replaced by a guy named Bob Chapek. And Bob didn't really have the same, we'll say heft to deal with to sort of keep the animals at bay, the folks who wanted to embrace all these progressive things. And as a result, if you think of Disney like a crime family, Bob Iger would be like Vito Corleone, and sadly, Bob Chapek turned out to be much more like Fredo Corleone, and it just went very poorly. He was quickly drummed out. And then Bob Iger came back, and with that, he was, listen, there was a fight between the legislature and Disney, but it worked out. I mean, they were able to kind of put it behind it. So hopefully, with them getting rid of DEI, it's a sign of good things to come.
Commissioner Sabatini, you've seen the news that Disney is joining this corporate move away from some of the DEI initiatives. Are you buying the reversal, and do you think it would lead to a more harmonious relationship with the state of Florida if it was sincere?
I'm not buying it, Matt. Actually, if you look at the details of what they're doing, although it is quite significant that the captain of the industry of wokeness, Disney, by far the leading company, large company in the country in terms of pushing wokeness as a product, is actually joining this trend. It's not joining the trend fully. It's actually sort of delicately putting forth gestures of unwokeness. For example, it's not entirely removing these ridiculous content disclaimers that the company used to put out. It used to put out these insane disclaimers that said Dumbo and Peter Pan are culturally insensitive and beware, be careful before you watch this film. Instead, what it's doing is it's essentially keeping those as footnotes. So they're still there. There's still wokeness in the company, but it's more of an abbreviated wokeness. And I think it has a long way to go before it joins the rest of the blue chip companies and conforming to the new market. I mean, Donald Trump won this country by millions of votes. The majority of this country doesn't want wokeness. It wants it stomped out. And it's time for Disney to come on board. I hope more people and your listeners are paying attention to its gestures and pushing the company to go in a better direction than it otherwise is.
But I'm here to celebrate the directional correctness, right? It used to be you woke up every day and you were learning that, like, Ursula from The Little Mermaid was a bad expression of trans people. I didn't even know Ursula was trans. I just assumed she was considerably more masculine. But if it is a sincere effort to get away from DEI and move toward just the tourism business, my suspicion is that would solve a lot of Disney's problems. Chris, do you believe that at its core, Disney wants to get out of some of this virtue signaling and get back to making money for their shareholders?
Well, yes, I mean, I'd like to believe that. There's a lot of evidence to the contrary. I think every parent, and I have 3 kids, all of them love Disney movies. Everybody wants Disney to be successful. The problem is you get these ideologues out there that say, like, listen, it's not really about making an enjoyable movie. But The Lion King won't suffice. We have to use this to make expressions, and we have to make bold statements and everything. And I think most parents just think it's total BS. And anyone who watches it is like, why are they doing this? Like, when the name of the book was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they couldn't have a white actress play Snow White, and they couldn't have dwarves because that was insensitive. Why are you making the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? It seems to me like those are very much necessary to sort of relay the purpose of it. But that's not what Disney was about. They were about trying to promote some message. And again, it's just been repudiated so many times. Like, how many times you have to see the "you go woke, you go broke"? And they're making movies that, like, they're turning, like, Indiana Jones over to a girl boss. And it's just, I think most people watch that at home and they're like, this is stupid, So I hope they do. I sincerely hope, on behalf of parents everywhere, they get their heads back where it should be, which is making movies that people want to watch and will pay to go see, not, social statements that like want to compete for the Oscars and for, like, best documentary or something. It's just gotten that they want to have every bit of flair that way. But I mean, again, they made an announcement, which my dear friend Anthony makes a good point, might just be window dressing, but at least it's something. It shows that they've stepped away from the sort of hostile, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead thing. So, I view that as a positive thing.
Anthony, there were some moments where Disney announced that there were investments in Florida that they weren't going to make because they didn't like Florida's stance on abortion or the rejection of radical gender ideology in our schools. Do you think they're done making investment decisions based on those types of cultural issues with this sign on DEI?
I think those options are probably off the table, Matt. They made that decision to withdraw funding and investment in Florida at basically the prime of their fight with in their showdown with DeSantis and the legislature back when I was a member of the legislature, and it was coming to a legal head, and they backed away since then. But I think now the stakes are much higher. Instead of just losing some autonomy with the Reedy Creek District, which is the name of their special district down there, instead, now they're facing 2 much more serious threats, one of which you're very familiar with, which is the combined tax loophole, which I think the state of Florida could pull in 2 seconds and basically make them pay their fair share of taxes. That's what they're really afraid of. And secondly, and I think this is even more significant, Pam Bondi's DOJ crushing them with civil rights lawsuits, because we've been talking about their content and their ridiculous wokeness as a product, but their company itself actually still is very heavily involved with DEI hiring. And now, instead of facing a lawsuit from Stephen Miller with the America First Policy Institute, which they did 2 years ago, now they could be facing a very serious lawsuit from the DOJ for their DEI hiring practices. So with the stakes being much higher than they were 2-3 years ago, I think Disney's done rattling its own saber towards.
I'm telling the producers right now, clip that, post it, and tag Harmeet Dillon at the Civil Rights Division over at the Department of Justice. Anthony Sabatini thinks that we could clean up some of that bad behavior. But at the end of the day, when it's all over, I actually want my home state of Florida and Disney to get along. Chris, isn't that better for both entities rather than the continued warring that we've seen under some features of the DeSantis government?
Well, I mean, in many ways, the arrival of Walt Disney was the beginning of the story of Central Florida. Before that, it was kind of a big swamp, and he came here and bought a bunch of properties and turned this into the top tourist destination in the world. And people save all year so they can come down here and bring their families and enjoy a pretty remarkable place. I mean, Disney, the way it's done, the way it's run, is very impressive. And it would be wonderful if we could go back to that sort of simple transactional relationship, which is you're a great employer and you're a great purveyor of businesses that people love to come spend money on, but that you don't get into the lane of telling the Florida legislature about what their education policy should be, and that you don't try and ram this stuff down everybody's throats. And as long as that happens, I think you welcome them back with open arms. There's no doubt about it. The question is whether or not, as Anthony points out, whether that's true and authentic, which we'll find out. And
I
again,
hope it is. I want mom and dad to stop fighting. I want Florida and Disney to get along. I never want to pay state income taxes, and I actually think that it might be attainable, but we'll stay on them. Anthony Sabatini, County Commissioner in Lake County, Florida, former state representative and former Speaker designate Chris Dorworth, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you.